A Reason and Purpose for Everything, Part 2. Evolutionists claim, quote, that evolution goes too slowly for us to see it happening today. They used to claim that the real evidence for evolution was in the fossil record of the past, given that evolution, according to Darwin, was in a continual state of motion. It followed logically that the fossil record should be rife with examples of transitional forms leading from the less to the more evolved. But the fact is that the billions of known fossils do not include a single unequivocal transitional form with transitional structures in the process of evolving. Even those who believe in rapid evolution recognize that a considerable number of generations would be required for one distinct kind to evolve into another more complex kind. There ought therefore to be a considerable number of true transitional structures preserved in the fossils. After all, there are billions of non-transitional structures there. But with the exception of a very few doubtful creatures such as the controversial feathered dinosaurs and the alleged walking whales, they are not there. Instead of filling in the gaps in the fossil record with so-called missing links, most paleontologists found themselves facing a situation in which there were only gaps in the fossil record, with no evidence of transformational intermediates between documented fossil species. The entire history of evolution, from the evolution of life from non-life, to the evolution of vertebrates from invertebrates, to the evolution of man from the ape, is strikingly devoid of intermediates. The links are all missing in the fossil record, just as they are in the present world. Cause and effect is the law of the universe. There is nothing which happens without a cause. Even that which does not happen has a cause. Quote, causality is universal. Nowhere in the world can there be any phenomena that do not give rise to certain consequences and have not been caused by other phenomena. Ours is a world of cause and effect, or figuratively speaking, of progenitors and their progeny. Whenever we seek to retrace the steps of cause and effect and find the first cause, it disappears into the infinite distances of universal interaction. But the concept of cause is not confined to interaction. Causality is only a part of universal connection. The universality of causality is often denied on the grounds of the limited nature of human experience, which prevents us from judging the character of connections beyond what is known to science and practice. And yet we know that no scientist restricts his reasoning to what he can immediately perceive. The whole history of humanity, of all scientific experiment, knows no exception to the principle of determinism. Causal determinism is, roughly speaking, the idea that every event is necessitated by antecedent events and conditions together with the laws of nature. End quote. Nothing can escape the law of cause and effect. Buddhism calls it karma, while the Word of God says, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap." Galatians 6:7. Who is behind the universe and all life? Who is behind the reason for the purpose which determines the specific cause required to bring a particular effect into being? In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Genesis 1:1. Things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. Hebrews 11:3. Before creation, there was nothing. Nothing is not merely something which cannot be seen, it is nothing. Even if nothing could be seen, there would be nothing there to see. If nothing could materialize, it would prove that it was never nothing to begin with. Nothing cannot be described, for it is nothing. All was created by the Creator. God determines He is the cause behind God determines He is the cause behind the cause which brings about the desired effect. Some may ask, who or what is behind God? The answer is nothing and no one, for God has always been. In the beginning, God. Genesis 1:1. God is the only being, the only entity who precedes even the beginning. God never began to be, for He has always been. God's pre-existence, His being before all things, has led to the existence of all, and only by Him do all things consist. Colossians 1:17. No matter how far back one could travel in eternity past, God would always be there waiting for you. God is known as I Am. Quote, WHVH is the Hebrew word that translates as Lord. Found more often in the Old Testament than any other name for God, approximately 7,000 times, the title is also referred to as the Tetragrammaton, meaning the four letters. WHVH comes from the Hebrew verb to be, and is the special name that God revealed to Moses at the burning bush. End quote. Quote, when Moses was commissioned by God to go to the Israelites with a message from him, Moses wondered what he would tell them if they asked him what God's name was. God's reply is most revealing. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thou shalt say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. Exodus 3:14. This signifies the real being of God, His self-existence, and that He is the being of beings. Therefore, YHVH declares God's absolute being, the source of everything, without beginning and without end. It also describes His eternality and immutability, as well as His constancy and faithfulness in fulfilling His promises, because it includes all time, past, present, and future. The sense is, not only I am what I am at present, but I am what I have been, and I am what I shall be, and shall be what I am. End quote. God is also known as El Olam, meaning the God of eternity. See Genesis 21 verse 33. God is eternal, which not only means He has no end, but that He also has no beginning. God is, always has been, and always will be, for He is the invincible, unstoppable God. The Word of God speaks of the eternal God, the everlasting God. He hath done whatsoever He hath pleased. Deuteronomy 33:27, Isaiah 40 verse 28, and Psalm 115 verse 3. See also Job 36 verse 26. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever Thou hadst formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, Thou art God. Psalm 90 verse 2. If a thing exists, if a creature exists, then it is because it was created. And if it was created, there must be a creator. And if there is a creator, there must be a reason for everything and everyone created, and therefore a purpose a specific purpose or purposes for and meaning behind everything and everyone's existence. The most infinitesimal reason for anything can be traced back to God. There is a reason and a purpose behind everything, and that reason is God, and the purpose is the fulfillment of His will and the bringing of glory to His name. Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honour and power, for Thou hast created all things, and for Thy pleasure they are and were created. Revelation 4:11. See also John chapter 1 verse 3 and Acts 7 verses 49 and 50. For by Him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions, or principalities or powers. All things were created by Him and for Him. And He is before all things, and by Him all things consist. Colossians 1 verses 16 and 17. What other origin can reason and purpose have than the predetermining will of God, who has always been? The only being who is before all things, as well as the cause, reason, and purpose for all things, is God. If there is a reason, then there must be a purpose. And for a purpose to exist, there must be a pre-existent will and design, and therefore a pre-existent designer who has willed it. Many are so ready to believe in fate, nature, or fortune, but are extremely antagonistic toward the thought of an all-powerful and sovereign, independent God. Quote, who has fixed and determined all things in their own order, place, and time, according to His good will and pleasure. End quote. See Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verses 1 through 8. Truly, it is the telling sign of all spiritually dead men that they are open to and will literally believe almost anything, and yet every one of them have an automatic inbuilt aversion to the true, sovereign, almighty God and His only gospel of salvation by grace alone. Everything comes from something else. Whether it be objects, people, or events in our lives, everything and everyone has an antecedent cause. Everything has a leading cause. There is an agent, a cause for every effect, and so we are compelled by this statement to ask, what is behind the cause? What brought the cause into being? What brought the agent into being? The world interminably ponders over something so simple as which came first, the chicken or the egg. The world believes that it is a question which has no absolute ultimate answer, but one which only leads to another question ad infinitum. Eggs, of course, come from chickens, as chickens come from eggs, but what produced the very first chicken? If an egg, then where did the egg come from? Did it just materialize one day? Did the chicken or the egg simply appear out of nothing with no reason for its appearance, much less its existence? If they had, then there could be no reason or purpose for them. But how can this be when chickens produce eggs and eggs in turn produce more chickens? And so, eggs have a reason and purpose, as do chickens. Does it not make perfect sense that the chicken was created by the Creator God to produce eggs? See Genesis 1 verses 20 through 22. Look at trees. Which came first, the tree or the seed? Trees come from seeds, and of course seeds come from trees. But where did the first tree come from? If a seed, then where did the seed come from? And if a tree, then where did the tree come from? It takes more faith to believe that a seed, tree, egg, or chicken just appeared out of nothing without any antecedent cause, or nothing being the antecedent cause, than to believe the massive evidence at our disposal which shows that each of these things were first created purposefully, and in an orderly fashion by a Creator God. Any professed cause must have a preceding cause, otherwise it cannot legitimately be argued as a genuine cause or source. Life created the universe, and not the other way round. The key is the design, the DNA of every living thing which always produces after its own kind. See Genesis 1 verses 11, 12, 24 and 25. A tree cannot produce an elephant, nor can a woman give birth to a sycamore tree. Everything produces after its own kind, and only after its own kind, because each one is coded to do so via DNA. A woman requires a particular grocery item. She plans to go to the local store. She walks to it, enters the store, buys what she needs, and then returns home and begins to prepare the night's meal. None of this happens by chance. From A to Z there is planning, order and necessity involved, even in this simple undertaking. The woman does not travel in any direction when she leaves the house, but specifically that path which she knows will take her to her intended destination. She does not buy any item from the store, but only that which she needs to make the specific meal intended. She returns to her own house, not that of a stranger, and then begins to prepare not just any meal, but a predetermined, particular meal which requires specific ingredients. This all takes planning, order, and skill. The grocery items necessary in preparing the meal do not simply materialize in her home just because she needs them, nor does the meal suddenly appear ready to serve. It takes mind. Planning and design must be employed if the woman is to have any hope of reaching her goal. All would agree with this scenario. However, whilst we believe that planning, design and order are all behind the existence of the store, the grocery item, the house, including the oven required to cook the meal, we are told by certain ones and fully expected to believe that there was no such planning, design and order behind the existence of the woman. Let us now look at another example of the impossibility of something coming from nothing. The humble telephone directory did not come about by chance, time, or coincidence. It did not summon itself into existence, nor was its size, shape, and content formed out of or determined by nothing. It did not simply appear, for before it existed, it was not. As soon as one sees a telephone book, one automatically knows that it did not suddenly appear, but that it required someone to have produced it for the express purpose for which it was made. But the telephone book could not have been produced if there were no trees from which paper is made by those who have the skill for such work. Trees have many purposes, one of which is to provide the ingredients to make paper which is used, among other things, to make telephone books. There is a reason for a telephone directory, and there is a practical purpose behind that directory's existence. Again, this takes mind. And mind provides irresistible evidence which undeniably implies motive and intention behind the phone book's creation. A phone directory does not contain a random collection of names, phone numbers and addresses, but is a specific, orderly and alphabetical listing of names, phone numbers and addresses of those who live in a particular city. Thus we see that a telephone directory could not exist without someone's having purposely produced it. Quote, "Nothing without a purpose can be an agent." End quote. So we see from this that not only must there be a reason and purpose for the telephone directory, but also for man's existence. If there is a reason and purpose for the phone book, then logically there must also be a reason and purpose for the one who compiled and produced it. So then, if there is a reason for the telephone directory, the chicken, the egg, the tree, the seed, the woman going to the store, etc., there must also be a reason behind the reason for all these things, and so it goes until one arrives at the source of all things. There is a reason and a purpose behind everything. Nothing can never be the origin of anything. The physics of nothing cannot begin with something. Stephen Hawking, the renowned astrophysicist, once wrote, quote, "If there is only one possible unified theory, it is just a set of rules and equations. What is it that breathes fire into the equations and makes a universe for them to describe? The usual approach of science, of constructing a mathematical model, cannot answer the questions of why there should be a universe for the model to describe. Why does the universe go to all the bother of existing?" End quote. Another gentleman has noted, quote, "In science, nothing acts for any reason or purpose. All scientific equations and formulae are passive. They lack agency. Everything is passive. Everything is relative. How can anything get going in such a system? How did the system even begin?" End quote. The question which science will never even begin to adequately answer is, why is there something rather than nothing? Quote, philosopher David Albert, a specialist in quantum theory, asks, where, for starters, are the laws of quantum mechanics themselves supposed to have come from? Modern quantum field theories, Albert points out, have nothing whatsoever to say on the subject of where those fields came from, or of why the world should have consisted of the particular kinds of fields it does, or of why it should have consisted of fields at all, or of why there should have been a world in the first place. Science is all about avoiding agency. Agents have purposes. They do things for reasons. They reflect teleology, the explanation of phenomena by the purpose they serve rather than by postulated causes, the doctrine of design and purpose in the material world. Science has done everything it can to ridicule teleology and deny that it exists in nature. It thereby denies agency and equations with any fire. Mind is all about agency, but mind doesn't exist in science it's just an epiphenomenon of matter, and supposedly wouldn't exist without matter being organized in a certain way. Science is about how and never why. How is about process. Why is about purpose. God is the ultimate agent who gets everything started, but if there's no God, what then? Science can't appeal to any kind of agent, and that means it has to invoke magic and miracles. In science, things have to get started for no reason at all. Things must happen randomly, accidentally, by chance, probabilistically, statistically, indeterministically, acausally. They certainly can't happen for any reason, with any purpose, with any plan of agency, with any mind. Mind is the opposite of everything scientific materialism stands for. Science is totally devoid of meaning. It's totally opposed to meaning. It openly rejects meaning. It has absolute contempt for meaning. The last thing you will find at the bottom of science is meaning. This is pure nihilism and skepticism. Science and atheism go hand in hand. End quote. In contrast to all this, everything we see, such as a road, a building, a car, a fence, etc., had to have had and did have a mind, an agent, someone behind their construction, and therefore a reason and purpose for and a meaning to their existence. The notion and construction of these things was no mere aimless, random and purposeless event, but for specific and predetermined reasons. If there is a reason for something, then there is always predetermination, planning and intent. Reason comes from mind. This is why science is so totally opposed to life and existence that has meaning, because if it had meaning, then it would necessarily have to accept the fact that there exists a mind which gave meaning to everything, and if meaning, then reason and purpose. The house was built for habitation. The road was built so that people could travel on it using the car that was made for just such a reason. The fence was built to keep something in and to keep other things out. To believe anything less than this would be nothing short of ridiculous. Yet man balks at the prospect that there is a creator, a God behind the creation of man, his world, and the universe at large. Devotees of the theories of evolution and the Big Bang see a tree and say it came into being by accident. They see the sky and think it is part of a universe which just appeared out of chaos, with no particular agent and for no particular reason or purpose. How can there be a reason for all that a man makes without there also being a reason for why a man is, without there also being someone behind the reason for man's existence? How can anyone accept the obvious, factual principle that if something has been built or made, it must necessarily have required a builder or maker, without also acknowledging the truth that someone must also have been behind the creation of the beings that produced the phone book, the building, the road, or the car, etc.? How can there be a cause for every effect, and yet no cause behind every cause? A cause is also an effect, for it is something which has been brought into being by the thought or action of something or someone else. Everything and everyone has an antecedent cause. Quote, "Every cause has its effect, and every effect has its cause." End quote. And every cause must also have its cause. Based on the law of cause and effect, it stands to reason that every cause is also an effect, which has an antecedent cause. Otherwise, the initiatory cause would have no cause behind it. It would just appear, it would just happen for no reason at all. So at what point exactly does an effect-producing cause have a cause itself? A ball ended up in a tree or on a roof because it was kicked or thrown. Action is the cause which produces the effect. But what produced the action? Mind. If there is an effect, there must be a cause and therefore an explanation. The effect is dependent upon the cause, and the cause is also dependent on whatever caused it. How can there be a reason for everything, but no reason behind and for every reason? How can there be reason behind the effect, but no reason behind the cause? Quote, "Nothing without a purpose can be an agent." End quote. There is a reason for everything, and everything, including reason and purpose, action, cause and effect, has a reason or agent behind it. Have you ever noticed that the so-called Big Bang is still called a theory? One who defends this theory has commented, quote, "Of course the Big Bang model is a theory, and of course it is also correct. It has been tested beyond reasonable doubt. Our current universe expanded from a hot, dense, smooth state about 14 billion years ago. The evidence is overwhelming, and we have hard data from primordial nucleosynthesis that the model was correct as early as 1 minute after the initial singularity. Of course, the initial singularity, the bang itself, is not understood, and there are plenty of other loose ends. But the basic framework, expanding from an early hot, dense, smooth state, is beyond reasonable dispute. End quote. But it must be asked, where did this hot, dense, smooth state come from? What caused it? And what came before it? This is the massive, unavoidable elephant in the room issue which evolutionists and Big Bang theorists have never been able to answer, or even come close to answering. They always say everything came from this or that, but they never say how the this or the that came into being. They speculate over the effect, which in turn becomes a cause, or became a cause, but they cannot tell where the effect came from that allegedly produced the universe around us. The most recent so-called explanation of how it all began has been around for a while now, but scientists are excited by the latest research concerning it. Quote, drawing on previous research in a number of different scientific fields, the researchers played connect the dots and arrived at a very interesting conclusion. According to the researchers, the most plausible answer to how life initially formed seems to be that meteorites slammed into ponds here on Earth, prompting the formation of self-replicating RNA molecules thanks to ideal nutrients in the water. End quote. Again, science cannot even commence a conversation on the beginning of the universe without starting with something that allegedly already was, in this case meteorites, ponds, and the planet Earth itself. How did the meteorites get here? How and why do they exist? How did ponds begin? And how did the Earth come into being? No doubt these are some of the, quote, loose ends, unquote, mentioned earlier by our Big Bang friend. The Word of God does not say, in the beginning was the universe, or the Earth, or the dense, smooth state, or the Big Bang. But in the beginning, God. Genesis 1:1. See also John 1 verses 1 through 3. In the beginning, God created. Genesis 1:1. Not in the beginning, the creation. There was no creation before God created it. There was nothing before God. Therefore, there could have been, would have been, nothing without God. Quote, the universe, defined as time, space, matter, and physical energy, had a beginning and is not eternal. And it is through Einstein's equations that scientists can trace the development of the universe back to its very origin, back to what is called the singularity event, when it actually came into being. Science has proven that the universe really did have a beginning. This obviously means that if the universe had a starting point in history, then it obviously began to exist, and it must have a cause for its existence. Therefore, if the universe needs a cause for its coming into being, then that cause must be beyond the universe, which is time, space, matter, and physical energy. We know that from nothing, nothing comes. So if there were ever a time when there was absolutely nothing in existence, then nothing would have ever come into existence. But things do exist. Therefore, since there could never have been absolutely nothing, something or someone had to have always been in existence. CERN, the European Organisation for Nuclear Research, is one of the world's largest and most respected centres for scientific research. Its physicists and engineers are probing the fundamental structure of the universe. They use the world's largest and most complex scientific instruments to study the basic constituents of matter, the fundamental particles. CERN researchers are baffled at how matter thrived in the early universe when it should have been destroyed by antimatter, a discovery which evokes a theory that the universe is controlled by a mysterious realm lying outside space and time. The researchers recently made a technological breakthrough when they compared the magnetism of an antiproton to that of a proton using a new technique which is 350 times more precise than the measurement taken in January 2017. But they found that despite the breakthrough, there wasn't a difference between the two, meaning that matter and antimatter should have destroyed each other eons ago, preventing the universe from even existing. Yet, obviously, that's not what happened. All our observations find a complete symmetry between matter and antimatter, which is why the universe should not actually exist, said research head Christian Smorer. An asymmetry must exist here somewhere, but we simply do not understand where the difference is. What is the source of the symmetry break? Perhaps the physical laws of the universe are steered by something or someone outside the universe. In other words, the universe isn't the base reality, but is rather one level of existence contained in another superstructure unknown to man. This is closely related to the viewpoint of late French physicist Bernard d'Espagnat, who once theorized that science offers only a veiled view of an underlying reality which science cannot access. Since then, his writings and lectures on fundamental questions such as what information does science really give us have provoked debate among scientists and philosophers." End quote. Some scientists conveniently take it for granted that much has always been, or that it originated from nothing, and then draw on nothing but theory and conjecture as to how the rest evolved. This is like writing out a step-by-step guide in how to cook a particular meal without any information in regard to what ingredients are to be included or how to properly prepare them for the cooking stage. When asked questions such as, "What came before the Big Bang?" evolutionists and scientists conveniently resort to inexplicable, untestable, and therefore unproven claims, such as everything comes from nothing, or that something has always been, and from that unknown something, somehow, everything came. Scientists can only appeal to that which is unprovable in their alleged explanation of how everything has come into being. There are so many gaps, nay, chasms, in science's explanation that even the most zealous scientist would have to admit they simply do not know how anything began. They have their theories and preferences, but they do not have ultimate fact, which would give them the ultimate provable and undeniable answer as to what is real and what is just mere supposition. The equally ridiculous theories of everything came from nothing and everything has always been can never be proven. Importantly, it is not up to the Christian to disprove either one, but for science to offer testable proof. It is the one making the claim that must offer testable evidence, or else his claim will always remain just that. However, all that science can do is offer up these two theories and expect others to believe what they say without question, merely because it is science speaking. If something cannot be proven, if there is no irresistible evidence to support it, then how can anyone in their right mind be expected to believe it? Why should anyone believe something that has no logical, reasonable evidence that will leave one in no doubt that it is true, other than convenience or ignorance? Truth is reality. Science, so-called, will always have more questions to answer than what it believes it has answered, because it refuses to accept the fact that there is a God and that He is the source and creator of all things. I say so-called science because real science, testable, provable science, always agrees with the Word of God. True Christianity has nothing to fear from science, and true science has nothing to fear from true Christianity. What has the genuine truth seeker got to fear from truth? The first law of thermodynamics, often called the law of conservation of energy, is a basic fundamental law of science. Essentially, it states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, but can only change form. This flies in the face of the Big Bang theory. So how did the universe come into existence? The first law of thermodynamics points to God's eternal existence. Remember, this law defines that something could not come from nothing. Science has effectively proven that if there was not an eternal God being to create the universe, there would have never been a universe. Since something can never come from nothing, then a creator had to always exist. Since a cause must be greater than the effect, an eternal maker, an all-powerful God, had to exist. Unwittingly, science has proven God's existence while at the same time debunking evolution. Nobel Prize-winning physicist Louis Néel stated, "The progress of science, no matter how marvellous it appears to be, leads to dead ends, and shows our final ineptitude at producing a rational explanation of the universe, and, it should be added, any rational explanation for plants, animals, and people. Instead of looking for the truth of creation, science has chosen confusion, suppositions, and deceit. Ignoring the evidence, evolutionists and others are forced to conjure illusions and assumptions, two more of which you should now be able to dispel. You cannot jump up the evolution ladder without explaining its first rung. Evolution was supposed to have begun when gas was affected by some unknown catalyst and formed a more complex, organized state, leading to life. Explaining this part of the process leaves evolutionists stumped." End quote. What kind of explanation is this? How can a proper, indeed scientific explanation legitimately, logically, or justifiably include that which is unknown? Gas was affected by some unknown catalyst? If it is unknown, how can anyone without any amount of certainty say how it would have interacted with gas? How would what have interacted with... How would what have interacted with gas? And what is this more complex, organized state exactly? So much of science and what scientists expect the masses to believe, as well as what evolutionists have to offer by way of proof, is just a joke. Quote, "They are left with no choice but to dismiss cosmic evolution as not pertaining to evolutionary theory. readers should not settle for weak theories that pass themselves off as fact. Investigate the facts. Use logic and determine the answer for yourself. If energy cannot be created, then an incredible amount of it cannot appear from nothingness. Evolutionists understand this problem. Often, focus is directed from how the universe began to an explanation of how it grew. By burying the initial creation of matter as an irrelevant point, scientists have created a series of smoke and mirrors, which, as we have seen before, is often the best and only way to explain nearly every facet of evolution. Many scientists, such as Professor of Physics Alan Guth, have also raised the issue of ignoring the universe's origin. First of all, I will say that at the purely technical level, inflation itself does not explain how the universe arose from nothing. Inflation itself takes a very small universe and produces from it a very big universe. But inflation by itself does not explain where that very small universe came from. Fred Heron, Show Me God. Further, a concluding statement by one of the greatest mathematical minds of the modern world, theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking, debunked the inflationary model. The new inflationary model, he said, was a good attempt to explain why the universe is the way it is. In my personal opinion, the new inflationary model is now dead as a scientific theory, although a lot of people do not seem to have heard of its demise and are still writing papers on it as if it were viable. That quote comes from A Brief History of Time. Every effect can be traced back to a cause, they say. However, many stop short of accepting the irrevocable and absolute truth that man did not just appear, but that there is a meaningful, purposeful cause behind his existence, and if a cause, then there must also be a reason and purpose. The problem with science and evolutionary theory is that they purposely leave out the one element that makes everything make sense: God. Trying to understand how everything came into being without the God factor is like trying to understand patterns without mathematics. The fact that a cause cannot suddenly be and have nothing behind it, nothing preceding it, no reason and purpose attached to it, leaves us with nothing else to conclude but that there must be something behind the cause which is behind the existence of whatever the proceeding subsequent cause or agent has brought about. Every fallen domino has a preceding domino behind it, and a proceeding domino or dominoes in front of it. Everyone knows that there was a cause behind the fall of each and every domino, but how can anyone accept the illogicality of the claim that there was no cause behind the first domino's fall? Water does not begin to ripple by itself. A ripple in the water does not bring itself into existence. Its origin is the pebble thrown into the water. If there is a ripple, there must also be an irresistible cause. Whether it is the first ripple or the last ripple, all find their origin from the pebble and its initial impact. Sometimes ripples in the water are caused by the wind, which is not seen. Yet though the wind cannot be seen, its effects prove its existence, which is duly evidenced by the water rippling. If there is an intelligent force behind the existence of something, then there must necessarily also be a cause and a reason for the existence of everything, and therefore a purpose. Reason, purpose, cause, and effect are all evidences of a pre-existent source. Man simply does not make something for no reason. There is nothing which man can do which does not have an underlying cause, motive, intention, or reason behind it. Even if a man purposely set out to do something for no reason, he would fail, for his attempt to do anything for no reason would demonstrate his reason for doing it. This inarguably implies that everything that exists has a motivation and therefore an intelligence behind its existence. Everything is because of something else. Every cause has an effect which in turn becomes a cause. Quote, the law of cause and effect states that every cause has an effect and every effect becomes the cause of something else. This law suggests that the universe is always in motion and progressed from a chain of events. The law of cause and effect and the cosmological argument for the existence of God based upon that law have implications in every area of human life. The universe is here and therefore must have an adequate antecedent cause. End quote. There cannot be an effect without a cause and therefore a reason. Quote, every action has a reaction or consequence. Whatever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Galatians 6:7. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the American essayist, lecturer and poet, said, "The law of cause and effect is the law of laws. The most important lesson involving human conduct and interaction is seen in the cosmic law of cause and effect." End quote. There cannot be anything which exists that does not have a preceding cause. And yet to some of the most knowledgeable minds on this planet, this universal rule, while true in every way concerning everything in the universe, somehow does not apply at all to the universe itself. If one does not have cause, then one cannot have reason. Moreover, if one does not have cause, one cannot have effect. Nothing can bring an effect into being except a cause. If there is evidence of any kind, there must necessarily be an agent. If all that a man makes is for a reason, logic would insist that there must also be a reason behind the creation, the existence of man. Quote, the principle of sufficient reason has a variety of expressions, all of which are perhaps best summarized by the following. For every entity X, if X exists, then there is a sufficient explanation for why X exists. For every event, E, if E occurs, then there is a sufficient explanation for why E occurs. For every proposition, P, if P is true, then there is a sufficient explanation for why P is true. End quote. How can one believe that everything in a room has a cause and a reason and therefore a source of intelligence behind its origin, except the man that is in the room? Everything in the room required an intelligence behind it that engendered or triggered its eventual existence, except man? All the furniture in the room has a maker, except the maker himself? How can anyone possibly side with the insane reasoning that though a beautifully crafted gold and diamond ring or a watch must have had an extremely skilled person behind its existence and accurate functioning, etc., but not believe that the far more complex craftsman himself has a maker? That the item which is made has a maker, a reason and a purpose, but that the maker himself suddenly appeared out of thin air, and that for no reason. This is at best an utterly implausible and nonsensical proposition. To illustrate the law of cause and effect, one scientist, R.L. Wysong, referred to the following historical event. Some years ago, scientists were called to Great Britain to study orderly patterns of concentric rocks and holes, an archaeological find eventually designated as Stonehenge. As studies progressed, it became quite apparent that these patterns had been designed specifically for the purpose of allowing a variety of astronomical predictions. Many questions, for example, how ancient peoples were able to construct an astronomical observatory, how the data resulting from their studies were used, etc., remain unsolved. But one thing we know with certainty: the cause of Stonehenge was intelligent design. Now, compare Stonehenge to the situation paralleling the origin of the universe and of life itself. We study life, observe its functions, contemplate its complexity, which highly intelligent men cannot duplicate, even using the most advanced scientific methods and technology. And what are we to conclude? Who would believe that Stonehenge might have been produced by the erosion of a mountain, or by catastrophic natural forces working in conjunction with meteorites to produce rock formations and concentric holes? What scientist or philosopher ever would suggest such an idea? No one in his right mind could be convinced that Stonehenge just happened by accident. Yet atheists, agnostics and skeptics expect us to believe that this highly ordered, well-designed universe, and the complicated life that it contains, just happened. To accept such an idea is irrational because the conclusion is unreasonable, unwarranted, and unsupported by the facts at hand. The cause simply is not adequate to produce the effect." End quote. So often science uses ignorance to explain away what it simply cannot or will not see or understand. Simply because one can adversely respond to a factual statement does not for one moment give that response any validity or credibility except in the minds of those who are all too willing to believe it, either based on their ignorance or because it would be far too inconvenient to believe anything else. To base a philosophy or worldview upon ignorance or endless speculation rather than fact is to be the king of fools. Surely then, if there is a reason and a purpose for Stonehenge, a road, a car, or a telephone directory, which were all made by man, then there must also be a creator, a designer, and design behind every single human being, and therefore a reason, purpose, and plan for their existence. If there is a reason and purpose for everything, then there is reason and purpose for man. If there is reason and purpose for everything, including man, there must therefore be a creator, a designer of the universe in which man resides. The universe has a beginning, and its beginning began with the God who preceded it. Quote, "In an infinite number of antecedent diversifying shuffles that actualize all possibilities, quantum laws and quantum effects themselves would be scrambled out of existence at some point, and so would sufficient mass to close an infinite number of antecedent cosmic epochs. From such antecedent universes, no big bounce could occur. The endless chain would be broken, and we would not be here. But here we are. Infinite reprocessing might unscramble entropy, but it would also terminate infinite reprocessing. The non-existence of our world is a very high price to pay for avoiding the second law of thermodynamics. Furthermore, since every epoch in an infinite series has an infinite number of predecessors, every universe must be non-existent. The very idea of oscillating universes is unintelligible." End quote. If all things, including man, just appeared out of a big bang, then egocentricity and hedonism rules the day. But again we pose the question, where then does morality come from? How did it come into being? Morality is an attempt to bring lawfulness to the chaos of sin. But again, where did this sense of morality, this sense of a requirement for morality and lawfulness come from? If it was not inbuilt, then where did it come from? What is its origin? If it was inbuilt, who built it in? How does law and order come from that which has no purpose or reason for existence? If all is by the hand, if all is by the hand of God, then there is reason and purpose for everything and everyone, and therefore consequences and ultimate judgment. The making of a phone directory is to serve a purpose, and so clearly there is a reason for its existence and naturally a person who obviously had motive and intention behind the reason for producing it. Everything leads back to its originating divine source. Purpose cannot exist without a reason. Likewise, there cannot be a reason for something without there also being a purpose for it. Everything serves its purpose. Moreover, there cannot be a reason for something without there also being a reason for the reason, a purpose for the purpose, and a cause behind the cause. A reason for existence does not just appear. It does not simply begin to exist with no preceding cause, but is put in place, predetermined and preordained by a higher source. Reason and purpose irresistibly imply an underlying intelligence. Quote, "Man possesses certain undeniable traits, the ability to reason, the ability to know, the ability to act rationally. But what is the origin of such critically important traits? The theory of evolution certainly has no adequate answer. The cause cannot give what it does not have to give." End quote. A book, for instance, cannot contain less than its author was aware of at the time of his writing it. Let me say that again. A book, for instance, can contain less than its author was aware of at the time of his writing it, but not more. Quote, "If my mind or ability to know is received, then there must be a mind or knower who gave it to me. The intellectual does not arise from the non-intellectual. Something cannot arise from nothing." End quote. The invention cannot be greater than its inventor. No matter how complex a machine or supercomputer is, the complexity of human beings is far superior. No one can invent something which supersedes their own intelligence. As complex as computers are, they all had to be made by man. They only know what they are programmed to know by feeding on the information or data they have been supplied with. Complexity of design surely suggests a designer, does it not? Computers did not just appear or bring themselves into being. Does this logical rule cease to be an absolute truth when the complexity of design exists within a human being? If design suggests a designer, then complexity of design insists upon this undeniable truth. It is the loudest, clearest voice proclaiming the existence of a designer. A well-managed garden evidences the existence of a gardener. So what makes anyone subscribe to the lie? Why are some so vehemently opposed to the reality that though there is a reason and a purpose behind all events in one's life, there could not correspondingly be something or someone that has designed, orchestrated and predetermined the reason and the purpose, indeed the very existence of any being? If there is an intelligence behind the well-maintained garden, then surely there must be a superior intelligence behind the one who maintains it. Nothing exists without reason and purpose, cause and effect. Therefore, life, and all who partake of it, has meaning. Man is not God. Man is not the root cause of all things. No one believes that anything they can see just suddenly appeared one day through its own power, no less. No one believes that house across the road just appeared. or that cars just materialize without anyone having studied and learned how to build the house or make the car. And yet man, with his vain and corroding sapience, though holding to the obvious fact that someone built the house or made the car, simultaneously and quite incredibly credits no one at all with the making of the maker, the human being, behind the building and the vehicle. There is a reason for every reason, a purpose for every purpose, and a cause for every cause. Therefore there must also be a reason for every purpose, a purpose for every reason, and a purpose, reason, and cause behind every cause. Everything has something or someone behind it, and therefore a reason and a purpose for its existence and for its being done. If there were no reason and purpose, everything would be without meaning. Consequently, life must involve more than just existing and then dying. How can there be a reason and purpose for everything made by a man, but no reason and purpose for the man? If there was no reason and purpose behind man, then there would be no sense to anything, and life itself would be a meaningless means of channeling us all toward its sole reason, purpose, and end, death. What kind of monstrous paradox would a life be which had no other meaning to it, no other purpose for its existence, than death? There are those who believe that we have no reason for existence based on the fact that no one will remember us in 200 years' time, just as we do not remember those from 200 years ago. This is simply juvenile thinking, for everyone leaves a footprint on this earth. We are all preceded by parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on. Just because we cannot remember or even know of a person's existence 200 years ago does not come anywhere near proving there is no reason for life, creation, or even the Creator himself. Looking at the world around us, at each other, and the universe at large, we would be hard-pressed to convince ourselves in all honesty that none of this, including ourselves, is for any reason or purpose. There is reason and purpose for everything we do, therefore reason and purpose for ourselves, and therefore there must be a reason and purpose behind the reason and purpose for our existence. How can any claim that there is no reason for anything when within the universe of everything there is nothing which has no purpose? If every effect is the result of a preceding cause, then there is purpose for the cause. The fact that there are things, animate and inanimate, shows there is purpose. Purpose is the underlying reason behind both cause and effect. Purpose always precedes reason, cause, and effect. Because man sees the purpose only after the event, in no way suggests there was no one behind the purpose. There would be no purpose for any cause if it did not produce an effect. If there is reason and purpose in what we do, then there is obviously reason for our existence. There is reason and purpose in and for everything we do, from going to work to grocery shopping, from helping someone in even the smallest way to saving someone's life. How then can there be reason and purpose for what we do, but no reason for why we are? If a reason exists at all, then it must include everything and everyone. Many look upon the rat race and think there has to be more than this. There has to be more to life than work and scrambling for the next dollar. And they are absolutely right. Sadly, few ever get beyond the questions and embark on a serious search for the answers. Many are trapped within the scenery of their own worlds where they are virtual slaves. Slaves of wanting more rather than working for what they need. Slaves at work, slaves of the system, slaving to meet the needs and desires of family and friends. Their lives are filled with meeting their immediate responsibilities and goals with no time to ponder the deeper things of life. Few have time to stop and think about life because they are so consumed with meeting their daily needs in this increasingly busy world. One man asks, "What if we stopped celebrating being busy as a measurement of importance?" Life today is fast and full of opportunity. The complication is we think we have to do everything. The implication of this is we end up being pulled into endless distractions without pausing to really think. If you are too busy to think, then you are too busy. End quote. For many people, perhaps the majority, quote, life is deeper than they care to swim. End quote. Most end up preferring to just skim the surface as they barrel toward death. Many say they have no time to think, when in reality the problem lies in the fact they refuse to make the time. Why must life include death? Why does death occur? Why must life end at all? Why is man a finite and mortal creature? Were we created only to give death an outlet of expression? Or is there more to our finiteness, our mortality? Surely there must be a reason for death. Some would answer by saying, if it has a beginning, it must also have an end. But man fails to come up with any viable alternative that goes beyond this worthy but simplistic answer. If man's mortality is the effect, then what causes this, quote, unrelenting threat of death, end quote? What brought death into life's world? How can there be a beginning and an end, but nothing in between that has any meaning? How can there be a reason and cause for the beginning, a reason and a cause for the end, but no reason, cause or purpose for anything in between? If something is, then there must be a reason for its existence. A reason comes before a beginning. Therefore there must also be a reason for death, and which preceded death. Someone's heart stopped, someone was hit by a car, etc. Does only life's end, death, have a reason, but life's beginning does not? If the atheist is correct in his understanding that human beings are a meaningless cosmic accident and that after death there is nothing but non-existence, then what possible reason and purpose would there be to life other than death and oblivion? But again, why death? Why does life have to end? For that matter, why did life have to begin in the first place? If life had to be, then everything that happens has to be. Or is death the only thing that is obliged to occur after life has begun? For death to occur, there must be life. And so both life and death have to be. Everyone accepts death, but why does death exist? Was death just created? Can there not be life without death? Or is death a consequence of something perhaps even darker than what natural man and even millions of religious people think? What is the meaning, the reason, and therefore the purpose for death? If death is the effect, then there must be a cause for it. Contrary to what most believe, death is not natural. It is not a natural part of our existence, but a very unnatural one. Death is an alien invader upon life. Death could not exist without life. Death comes as a consequence. Death is a consequence, a constant and ever-present reminder of something far worse. The comparison between the following scriptures brings home the stark reality of the unnaturalness of death. Genesis 1 verse 31 tells us, "And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good." When God created man, he filled him full of life, not death. Not life and death. Genesis 2 verse 7 tells us that in the creation of Adam, God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living or lively, active soul. There is nothing here or anywhere else in the Scriptures which would lead any man to rightly conclude that the breathing of life into Adam included death, either spiritual or physical. John chapter 11 verse 35 says, "Jesus wept." Why did Jesus cry? Though Christ's silent tears were in relation to the people's grief over the death of Lazarus, quote, "Was there nothing in those tears beyond sorrow for human suffering and death?" Could these effects move him without suggesting the cause? Who can doubt that in his ear every feature of the scene proclaimed that stern law of the kingdom, "The wages of sin is death," Romans 6:23, and that this element in his visible emotion underlay all the rest. End quote. Physical death is by no means the worst death. Spiritual death, eternal separation from God, which precedes physical death, is by far the worst of the two deaths. The creature that was among the very good creation of God is now by its very nature separated from God because of sin, and lies in a state of spiritual cessation before its Maker. As with all things, there is also a cause behind the effect of death, of death's very existence. Life does not cause death. It is merely a precursor to it. Death is not found in life. Life was not finite when God gave it to Adam. Mortality was not part of the package of life which was given to man. So what actually is the cause for death's existence? What opened the door to this malignant invader? I'm not speaking in terms of the consumption of unhealthy foods, or smoking, or excessive drinking, or being careless when crossing a busy road, or driving on it in a reckless manner, but of why death exists in the first place. What is the origin of death? Why is it part of our lives? Like all things, death has an origin, and it is clearly explained in the Word of God. The first mention of death or dying appears in Genesis 2:17. The Word of God says, "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die." Genesis 2 verses 16 and 17. In God's warning of certain death should man sin, we learn that prior to this, death did not exist. The warning that death would come and that it would be the direct result of man's disobedience toward God proves conclusively that death was not part of life prior to sin. Clearly, the origin of death is sin, disobedience, and rebellion against the Word of God. The wages of sin is death, Romans 6:23. Every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. James 1 verses 14 and 15. Here we see the inextricable link between sin and death. All sin is rebellion against God. All sin is disobedience toward God.